Focusrite's Air mode, Solid State Logic's 4K mode, and Universal Audio's Vintage mode all have one thing in common. They aim to color your audio by emulating the sound of older audio equipment. But how do these modes compare audibly, and which one is the best? That's what we're going to find out in this video. Hey, Julian Kraus here, and in the past I've reviewed the Focusrite 2i2, the Solid State Logic SSL 2 and the Universal Audio Vault 2 audio interfaces. All of these interfaces have a mode which deliberately colors the sound, and I have had a look at these individually in the review. Here I want to focus more on the audible differences between the modes, let you listen to some audio samples and directly compare them. For this test I ran the exact same signal into the before mentioned interfaces and recorded the audio. I will now play you these recordings and toggle between the raw audio and the three modes so you can get a feeling of how they sound. Enjoy! There is a theory which states that if ever anyone discovers exactly what the universe is for and why it is here, it will instantly disappear and be replaced by something even more bizarre and inexplicable. There's another theory which states that this has already happened. There's another theory which states that this has already happened. There's another theory which states that this has already happened. Now, after listening to them, I gotta say that the vintage mode of the UA Vault 2 and the 4K mode of the SSL 2 sounded relatively similar. Both of them give the audio a bit more treble, and we can see this in my frequency response measurement. In fact, all three modes have a very similar rise in the higher frequencies of about 2 decibels. In that regard, the Air, 4K and vintage mode behave very similarly, and the difference between the modes is only half a dB. So I'm inclined to say that they have pretty much the same audible effect on the frequency response in the upper range. In the lower frequencies though, we can see some bigger differences. Here the vintage mode shows an ever so slight bump centered around 60 Hz. The 4K mode is relatively flat in the lower frequency range, and the Air mode reduces the bass region by about 2 decibels. So the vintage mode has a very slight V-shaped curve, the 4K mode focuses more on a treble boost, and the Air mode results in an overall brighter sound with a general upwards tilt of the frequency curve. In terms of distortion, the three modes are also different. When we have a look at a typical recording level, the distortion introduced by the Air mode is quite minor. The third order harmonic sits around -80 dB, and I doubt that this amount of distortion is going to be audible. When the signal rises, the distortion also rises a bit, but not by much. And I would argue that this amount of distortion is still inaudible in most cases. This is in contrast to the 4K mode. Here we can see a dense forest of harmonic overtones, peaking as high as -35 dB. This amount of distortion can definitely be audible, and it actually rises even further when the signal gets stronger, increasing the audibility even more. The vintage mode seems to be in the middle of the three. With a normal recording level it adds hardly any distortion, but when you push the signal a bit, the distortion rises noticeably. Although it is still relatively low, and I would argue that this is also hardly audible. So Focusrite's Air mode hardly adds any audible saturation and relies more on the big change in frequency response to achieve the desired sound. By the way, this is the reason you can emulate this mode with an EQ curve, and I've shown this in a previous video. Universal Audio's vintage mode also mostly relies on a change in frequency response to achieve the vintage sound. but it does add some amount of saturation if the signal is pushed close to the maximum, which might then become audible. The SSL's 4K mode utilizes both a change in frequency response as well as adding a noticeable amount of saturation to the audio, which results in a slightly more aggressive sound. What do you think? I'm really curious, and you can vote for your favorite in the comments below. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and for more audio comparisons and reviews, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you all in the next one.